Hi folks, welcome to this October mini workshop. I've sort of had to give this mini workshop a bit of a title, and I chose special effects. Really it's a bit, I suppose it's a bit more of a broader thing than that. I'll show you a couple of special effects, but it's really more about approach. I think if I'd have given it that sort of title, it might not have made quite so much sense. But it's the way we approach, the way we paint. There are many different ways. I'm just going to do this demonstration. It'll make more sense, I hope, as I do it. Let me just give you some. I'm just going to do a mock-up scene here, and I've just penciled out an imagined sort of wall scene with a bit of a wooden style going on here. Perhaps it's the edge of it's the boundary of a field somewhere. I like to sort of play with the imagination. Maybe it's a little path down to a lovely little bay on the coast, lovely little beach just beyond this point that you walk down to. I think it's really good, actually. That's all part and parcel of what I'm dealing with in this mini workshop, is to just try to whet the appetite, get the imagination going. Let me just show you a couple of things. We'll show you a technique that I use in situations like this. I'm just going to put out some clean colours. I don't really need a particularly clean palette for this. I'm just putting out some Viridian green. I'll play that off against something warm. Let's grab some burnt sienna. And what else can we put up here? Some yellow. I'm just thinking about colours we might find in this sort of situation. Let's just start with those for the moment. So I want to show you, I'm just going to put down some washes, then I'm going to show you something I do a lot. Because I paint in the loose style, I don't like, imagine we've got an old stone wall here, perhaps a couple of 100 years old or so, and over the years, lichens, mosses, various sort of vegetation have grown up into this old wall. I'll just start with, just got a bit of water going on here. There's a bit of green in the brush, actually. Just paint the wall sections, and I'll hopefully be able to show you exactly what I mean. Now, as with everything, it's all about timing. But I've discovered all of these things just by playing with paint, and there's no substitute for that in terms of learning. You must play around a lot with paint and paper and water. Just imagining something at ground level here. I'll get to this special effect in a moment. Let's just set the scene up to start off with here. Now then, let's say that there's a bit of a soily, well-trodden path here. We'll warm it up with a bit of burnt sienna. Maybe the timber. We'll just give that some warmth. That's burnt sienna as well. Top of the post there. I'm not going to bother with the background because it's not about that. If you were to do a painting like this, you'd start with a nice blue sky back there, whatever colour sky you want really, but you'd start off with a sky, let that dry, and then put this foreground area that I'm going to show you in once the background sky had been allowed to dry. So there we are. There's a sort of first wash that will set up the scene for what I want to do next. So I'll just run this through as though I'm producing a real painting. Just picking up a small brush here with some blue in it, a bit of extra ultramarine, a bit of blue, sorry, a bit of burnt sienna, and I'll just darken that upright post as it probably won't be catching as much light. Something like that. Going around here. Maybe this area, lovely bright sort of spring-like colours here. That's just cadmium yellow and viridian green. Just go to town with some spring colours. And then what I want to show you is all to do with something that when I grew up, when I was in school and I could get my hands on a book advising one how to paint in watercolour, if you could find a good book, and there were some around, unfortunately I never seemed to sort of manage to find them. A lot of the books, the ones that I had access to, unfortunately, would tell you to avoid something called the cauliflower. It's called cauliflower for simple reason that it dries out looking like a sort of cauliflower, as you might expect, as the name suggests. But as I was developing my own styles, I was watching one other fantastic artists like John Blockley, and I was looking at their work and thinking, wow, you know, what is it that appeals to me so much about these artists? And on closer sort of inspection of their work, I was lucky enough to sort of see their work in real life in the galleries in places like the Cotswolds in England. And on closer inspection, you could see that John Blockley in particular did not shy away from cauliflowers. In fact, he used them to incredible effect. And this is what I want to show you now. Now, it's, as with all things in watercolour, it's all about timing. So here's the simplest form of cauliflower. I've just taken this little small brush here and I've picked up as much water as it will hold. It is almost dripping wet. Now, if I wait the appropriate length of time, it's just slightly too wet at the moment, but if I give it another half a minute and I tap this water into this surface, I'm just having a bit of fun there, just softening off that, and I tap this water into the surface, particularly where there's heavier deposits of paint. This isn't going to work on paler washes, okay? This really only works where there's a heavy deposit of strong paint. Now, it doesn't matter whether that's a saturated intense colour area or whether it's a dark toned down tinted area. It works best on these high saturation areas and dark areas, not so well, or far more subtly, let's say, in paler areas. So let me just show you. I'm going to try it out somewhere where I think the dampness has just gone out of the paper. If I try it in here, you've got to be patient because it doesn't happen immediately. Let me do it about here. So I'll just give that give that a minute, and perhaps I'll zoom in a moment and you'll see exactly what I mean. Now, if I want to intensify one area, what it's doing, and you'll see when I home in, I'll show you this closer up. What it's doing is water is landing in the surface area of the paint. As I say, this isn't going to work if you let it go completely dry. Well, I'm going to show you how to do that when it's completely dry. It's separately. But for this, which is slightly different, you have to catch it so that the sheen is just starting to go off the paper. And you tap the clean water in droplets like this. And these small clusters of cauliflowers start appearing. It's simply because the water seems to push away from itself the colour pigment, leaving these runbacks, cauliflowers, blooms, whatever you want to call them. But here's an additional, here's how to get really clever with this. It's, if I take this this small brush now, and I choose this particular area here, because it's quite dark, it's quite intense, this darker green area, and I load that with water, okay? Keep loading it with water. What you'll see is this little area will start popping out. It's just starting to go now, just at the end of my brush as I'm pointing there. Just zoom in a second so you can see better. Just to get the focus on my camera. There, that's okay, I think. So I've just, I'll show you again, just by putting water in this area here, it's not just lightening. That's not me taking paint off with a thirsty brush. That's different. You're creating a very natural shape, something you'd find akin to this sort of surface, an old stone wall. Now then, here's the really clever bit. If you take a different colour, let's take a red. My red in question here is alizarin crimson. Now I'm also using a lot of water with this alizarin crimson, and if I drop that, just make contact like that and leave it do its own thing. You can even feed it that further still with let's say sort of carefully chosen colours, because you don't want to go, for instance, I wouldn't put green back on top of that red, because green and reds, if they mix together, they will actually they'll negate each other, they'll cancel each other out, they'll actually go dark neutral. But if you keep the colour harmony, so the related colours, orange reds, reds oranges, or you could go the other way, blues and greens, what you'll create are these incredibly effective looking clusters. Just to prove the point, green on green is fine, but you get these natural looking shapes and textures in your painting. So that's what I call feeding. I refer to it as just sort of feeding the it sounds more like a botany sort of lesson, but you're feeding the cauliflower. You're feeding this area that you know is going to bloom. And it's, let me just show you on top of the wall here. Now that the wall has gone dry, if I put a lot of water at the top of this wall, and the top of the wall is perhaps where you would most likely find moss growing and other wild organic things. So I've just loaded a couple of areas with a lot of water, and I'll go in with our mix of of viridian green and cadmium yellow, and just land. I'm almost just making contact. I'm not really brushing anything. I'm not moving the brush around too much. I might just circle it a little bit like that. Once you've got that starting colour up here on top of the wall, you can load that up with appropriate colours. For instance, I could put a sort of lemon yellow on top of that green. It would work. You can go opposite. You can go to the red, but this is and it's actually, I suppose it's good practice, because you're learning about what opposite colours do. By opposite, I mean complementary colours, or they're referred to as complementary colours. They're colours that sit opposite each other on the colour wheel. So my right thumb here is on a green. On the opposite side of the colour wheel, you'll find a red, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. However, if I were to mix them up too much, you get into neutral territory. You get into if you use too much of the warm colours, you go a muddy sort of neutral. But you can create beautiful neutrals if you want to. But the main technique that I want to get across here is this loading up of areas deliberately creating, so that you're deliberately creating cauliflowers for good effect. I mean, it's particularly good on these sort of old stone walls, but it can be used to great effect on old cottage walls, anywhere that you might find, this sort of thing growing. It'd have great fun. It's all about lots of paint and lots of water. And I'll show you in a moment what happens, how you can really make those sing if I just go a little bit darker underneath them. But it's a bit too wet for me to do that just now. Before I do that, before I take that to its sort of a more finished effect, I'm just still having fun here. The other thing I do as well is I'll just tap white gouache in amongst this. Of course, you've got to remember this. This is all still wet. In fact, I'm nearly missing the window of opportunity. This is drying off rather rapidly. So, but when it does dry off, I'm going to be showing you another similar technique, so that you can again make similar sort of textures even when the paint has gone dry. So this is just white gouache. I'm tapping in to damp colour. But the secret here, the essential thing here, is that you cannot be mean with the paint. The surface of the paper has to be loaded, really heavily loaded with paint. When you're heavily loading, when you're putting a lot of paint load into the brush, you must be matching that with water, the amount of water. So, right, let's say that, if these are these shapes themselves will give an overhang. And if I were to mix a dark, shadowy sort of mix, this is ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, giving me a purplish sort of colour. If I just tease this up underneath those shapes there like this, you'll see that those things growing on top of the wall there will have more definition to them. Okay, and you could go, those shadows could go warm. I'm just really playing lights off against darks, saturated colours off out against non-saturated colours, colour temperatures off between each other. So there we are. So you start looking at the negative sort of shapes now, rather than the positive. The positive shapes being the clusters of mosses, whatever, and the sort of, I call it negative shape. I simply mean what's not organic matter, and probably what is just brick face, still evidence of the stone wall underneath all this greenery. So those are techniques that you'll find incredibly useful. I want to show you, before I'm done with this, I'm going to speed dry this now and show you one more technique in the same vein, achieving something very similar, because I'm showing you this on this particular demonstration because of the subject matter. It lends itself to this sort of subject matter. But you can keep going at this. You can keep tapping water on adding colour. You will, like any watercolour painting, if you overdo any individual thing, it'll start looking ugly. So make sure you've got the balance of these things like tonal value, colour saturation, and colour temperature. Make sure you get them all in balance. That 70-30 thing that I'm always talking about. But let's say now then we'd had this fun. We've as you can see, we make we create this particular effect. Quite happy with it. And then it's gone dry, and then it's completely dried out, and we're thinking, oh, you know, I'd like to do a bit more to that now. I've lost some of that lovely, some of those lovely effects. So I'm going to speed dry it. Okay, so I'm going to show you now is we've got to imagine that I've gone in dark here, so I've just put a bit of dark paint on here and then speed dry it. So ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. I'll have a dark section of our wall about here, something like this. Okay, now I'm going to speed dry this. So just soften some of those edges a bit. And so let's say we want some texture into this dark area because we feel as though we've made the area too flat, and it requires some texture. So very similar to what we were doing when we were working wet in wet. We're now working wet on dry, but to achieve a very similar effect. There's a couple of ways you can do this. The first way is that I'm just going to, this brush is being dropped into water, and a fair bit of the water has been left in it, just like we did on the wet in wet effects around here. And I'll just scrub away at these areas, and you'll see these little areas starting to pop. And again, you can read whatever you want into these, whether they're just little lichens, mosses, even flower heads that are popping up in front of the wall here. And you just keep going back and forth. You keep dunking your brush in water and wiping it clean like this. Okay, and we'll have something over here. I mean, the type of shapes you make is entirely up to your imagination, you could, if you really wanted to, you could even start dropping colour back into those. So, and that would bring some colour into an otherwise dark area. Okay. These are incredibly useful techniques, quite specialised. And watch what happens now if I just tap a bit of water, a couple of droplets of water into some of those dark. As I said earlier, this isn't going to register. These marks I'm making are not going to register on pale areas. They're only going to really register on these darker areas. And then I've just tapped clean water onto those dark passages. Give them a minute, because what's happening is the water is sat on top of the paint. It's sat on top of the paper, and it hasn't yet agitated the colour, the pigment, the paint. So there's no point in doing it. I'm going to lift them off with a tissue, with a cloth. There's no point in doing it until you know that the water is activated with the paint. And I think probably, well, I've been talking this last 10-20 seconds, that's probably adequate. So I push down and lift off. Not as, you know, it's an effect. It's another effect. It's another option open to you. It's another feather in your cap, if you like. It can be quite effective. So there we are, folks. There are some of the more sort of advanced techniques that we can learn and include, adopt and adapt in our own work, and just to take this bit of fun to its something a little more believable. Just gonna have a bit of fun here. Just picking up the rigger brush, with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and we can perhaps infer that there's some nice rocky facets in the wall. As I said, some of these heads, if you put a little sort of, give them a little darkness underneath there, turn the brush around, drag that down, you sort of got flower heads, wildflower effects, without having to, you know, sort of go in and create these very contrived looking flowers. It's sometimes the less you can do without a brush, the better. It's water and paint that will often, if the brush just delivers and doesn't interfere too much, then the water and the paint will do it for you, and it's often so much more sophisticated looking as a result. So it's just good fun, just absolutely brilliant fun. And there we are. Scrub around a little bit if you want to soften some of those lines that you've put in. A very versatile rigger brush. And you do the same over on this side of your fence, of your wall, I'm sorry. And finally, just to round off here on this little mini workshop, one last little tip or technique that I use. I've got an old hog hair brush here. It's actually a brush designed for acrylic and oil painting. It's quite a coarse, stiff brush, and when I often see my work take on too much hard edge in some places. Now, you know, I'm going to repeat what I say, you know, in the main, a lot of my main videos, my demonstrations, I will talk a lot, I will mention it a lot, and that is the 70-30 ratio. So if you feel as though there's too much hard edge, and you feel as though the ratio should be different between hard edge and soft edge, I just feel as though this dark shape here has got too much hard edge about it. So I take this hog hair brush, I put it in water, just drop it in water, and just manipulate the water into the fibres a bit, then shake out the surplus. So I've got just a damp hog hair brush, and I will just, you know, it's very arbitrary. This is very, you do a bit and you stop and you think, is that better? Is that enough soft edge? Have I softened enough? Perhaps this should be softened over here. Should leave the harder edges around this area here, soften up here a bit, soften down here maybe. You know, when you get paint moving, you can even sort of suggest that this shadowy area comes across. So I'm borrowing paint now. I'm borrowing paint from other areas. There's no paint in this brush. There never has been any paint in this brush. Not today anyway. Yeah, these are all very, very... these are all techniques that will make your work look far more sophisticated. And I've gone very bright, very saturated colours here, perhaps a little artificial, but you know, for the purpose of me doing that was just to be able to demonstrate exactly what I was aiming to achieve here. So there we are. Just a quick recap. We worked wet in wet and chose the right moment, timing-wise, to drop water in to deliberately create cauliflower effects, blooms, runbacks, whatever you want to call them. That, on their own, is an effect. Then you can load those cauliflowers, those areas, while they're still very wet. You can load them with other colours. You can dry that all off. You can then drop clean water on and lift off, creating further sort of techniques. And again, you can load colour into those lift-offs, those areas where you've lifted paint out. And the key is just to learn and make sure that you're logging what's happening. Make sure that you're taking in and storing what it is that's happening in front of you. You need to watch what the paint and water will do for you, and only use, there are occasions when you only use brushes just to deliver the paint to the surface, almost nothing more than that. So I hope you found this useful, folks, and we'll see you next time round.